I've entitled the lesson today, Protect This House. And so how many of you guys remember where that came from? Protect This House. It was a very famous ad campaign a couple of years ago. It was Under Armour, all right? Under Armour out of Baltimore, Maryland. So Protect This House. And it was a picture of lots of different famous athletes, these guys who have like 52-inch chests, wearing these really tight Under Armour things. And it was all about how Under Armour helps you protect this house. And of course, the metaphor was nobody comes into our house and beats us on our home court. And it's unfortunate that does sometimes happen in the world of professional sports. Sometimes even in the NBA Finals, you lose on your own home court as Don cackles with glee. Yeah, it's true. So if you don't get that joke, it's okay. Just go to ESPN and you'll understand it all completely. Protect this house. So we're going to be in John chapter 2 today. John chapter 2, and we're going to talk about protecting. A man of God takes the steps necessary to preserve the house of God. Right? I appreciated Fernando's thoughts so much today in that way. That as a man, right, as a man and a man of God, there are choices that we are called to make and that we need to just make. And whether you call that manning up or being a man or whatever was popular in your family, God has a way and a mentality and a perspective that he wants human males to have. And this is not a gender thing. This is a God thing. This is a God thing, right? A man of God takes the step necessary to do what must be done to preserve God's house. And so today we're going to look at Jesus and his actions in John chapter 2 and how they show us both the very active, proactive, even aggressive, if you will, actions of Jesus, but the heart behind that and what was really underneath it. And fortunately for us, in this text in John 2, we both see Jesus overturning the temple and we see these very bold actions. But because of the way John tells the story and the scriptures that he quotes as Jesus' justification, we also understand exactly where Jesus was coming from when he did these things. What was in his mind? What was in his heart? What might have been his motivation to act in a way that seems to us sometimes perhaps out of character, right? And I can promise you, Jesus was not losing it here. He was actually defending it, right? He wasn't losing his mind. He was stating his mind. He was speaking his mind, right? John chapter 2 in verse 12. After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and brothers and his disciples. There they stayed for a few days. When it was almost the time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, he found men selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables, exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all of them from the temple area, sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, "Get these out of here. How dare you turn my Father's house into a market?" And his disciples remembered that it is written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." Psalm 69. Then Jesus demanded of him, then the Jews demanded of him, "What miraculous sign can you show us to prove that you have the authority to act this way?" And Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple and I'll raise it again in 3 days." And the Jews replied, "It's taken 46 years to build this temple." And in fact, it wasn't even complete then. "And you're going to raise it in 3 days?" But the temple he had spoken of was his body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples recalled what he had said. And then they believed the scripture and the words that Jesus had spoken. Now, while he was in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, many saw the miraculous signs he was doing and believed in his name. But Jesus would not entrust himself to them, for he knew all men. One of the things that we need to remember right away is that for the Jews, the temple, it's different than for us going to church in a sense, right? So we come to this place and we don't expect God to literally be here. We understand that God inhabits this place when his people come together, right? That God lives in the heart of each true believing Christian, and that as we come together, we bring, if you will, those little pieces of divinity into a place. And so God is dwelling in this place through the hearts and lives of all of you. But for the Jews, the temple, remember, you've got the Holy of Holies, the holy place, the Ark of the Covenant. For in their mind, the temple, like the tabernacle, God literally, physically inhabited that space. So much so that when the high priest went in to perform their priestly duties on the Day of Atonement and around the Passover time, they would tie a rope to his ankle in case he was struck dead by being in the physical presence of God. This is a practice that they had. Maybe you've heard of that. I've heard of it many times, and then I researched it. It's actually true. Because it's kind of like one of those preacher stories, and so I thought, surely that can't be true, but it was actually true. And so for them, the temple and God were synonymous things, right? So for Jesus to shut down the temple area was in some ways cutting them off from the celebration of one of their most sacred holidays for an entire day. This is a really big statement that he's making. It's a really big thing. The divine presence manifested in the Jerusalem temple played the central role in Israel's life and worship. Remember that the temple was built on the threshing floor that King David had purchased from one of the Jebusites. You can read about that in 2 Samuel chapter 24. Right? But the threshing floor, that location, was also happened to be Mount Moriah, which is where Abraham sacrificed Isaac. So not only is the structure important, but there's the dirt that it's on has a lot of historical significance, right? Think about it like Wrigley Field, right? Or like the old Forum in LA. There are certain places that are just kind of holy ground, right? There's something, or for me, it's the Boston Garden that they've now torn down, right? But there are places where so much history has happened that the place in itself becomes imbued with a power and a significance, right? People play better on those courts, right? Or you know, maybe it's a place that you visited as a child or the house you grew up in. You go back there and you get misty with all the memories of those things, right? But for the Jews, remember that sacred space wasn't just something that they conceived of mentally, but sacred space was an actual place. And that there was such a thing in the Jewish mind that the physicality of a place, if God had touched it, that place was forever holy. It was forever divine. And that certain activities were prohibited in that space because it had been touched by God. This is true of the Christian as well, right? Certain activities are now prohibited in our bodies because we have been touched by God. 1 Corinthians 6 is one example of those things, right? But they're prohibited because we are sacred space. All right, so you have this place where Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac. Then it was a place where God did threshing. Does anybody know what threshing is? Right, during the wheat harvest, threshing is separating the wheat from the chaff. It's a place of separating the good from the bad, the productive from the useless, in a sense, right? So the temple sits on this place that was known for God providing a sacrifice in lieu of a human life. It sits on this place where God historically has sorted out righteous from wicked. And now it sits on this place where the Jews where Herod rather has built this temple, and the Ark of the Covenant, it sits there, right? So this famous religious artifact. And so this is not just like, oh yeah, Jesus kind of locked the doors of the church for a few hours. They like us getting locked out of the sound room a couple weeks ago. That's not what this is like. This is a deeply emotional moment for people because it's the Passover. This is a major holiday. It's a pilgrimage holiday. So people would come from all around the Roman world. They would pour into Jerusalem for this festival. And imagine having traveled for multiple days or longer, and you get there and church is closed. Right? This made a huge impression on people. Right? The Gospel of John only gives it a few verses, but this is a major, major deal. And so one might be asking, well, what was Jesus thinking of? Well, I can tell you that Jesus was protecting his house. A father protects his house. He was protecting God's house. And that whatever inconvenience there might have been, or whatever social uprising there might have been, or whatever people might have said about his actions or behaviors in that moment, his motive was to protect God's house. It wasn't to punish people. It was to protect what God said was his. You know, a father will go to great lengths to protect his house, to protect his family. And all of you who are fathers know exactly what I mean. When your child is threatened, what's your first thought? Oh, let me just invite him for cocoa. No. That's not the first thought, right? Or your wife is threatened. How many of you have ever woken up thinking that there was a burglar in your house? Or heard a noise at night and rolled off and went under the bed or something like that? Right? If you think someone's invading your house, right? We get kind of way about that. How many of you have ever been broken into? We have. Ever had your house broken into? What does that feel like? It feels like a major violation, right? Like somebody was in my space where my babies sleep, where my wife nurses, where my children play, where my wife and I make love. Somebody was in my space. Somebody was in God's space this day, and Jesus was not fired up about it. He was not fired up about it. You know, this is a very fatherly thing that Jesus does. He protects what is his Father's. You know, it's interesting that this passage, I think, Norm, you can go to the next slide, the funny one with the we go. So this is, we go is an acronym for what is going on here. All right, Jim Blau taught me this little thing, you know, what is going on here, you know. So what is happening? Well, I've explained some of it, but historically what's happening? What's the circumstance? What is Jesus so fired up about? Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the event itself, right? It's a high holiday and everyone's coming into town. Well, so remember, what were the requirements for offering sacrifices on the Passover? You know, you could have a sheep or a goat, right? And if you didn't have that kind of money, you could have a dove, right, or a young pigeon. But the one thing that all of those had to have in common was they had to be unblemished. They had to be in pristine condition. So a lot of people didn't drag their sheep and goats across the countryside into Jerusalem because they could fall and get injured. They could be wounded by another animal. Something could just happen to them in the process of the journey. And so what happened was a custom grew up that at the temple, the priests and the Levites who managed the temple there would provide unblemished animals there in the outer courtyard, which is called the court of the Gentiles. You can Google that up and you'll get a diagram. But it's this large outer court, and people could buy those things there, and that way they were ensured of having something pure to offer God. They didn't have to deal with, in some sense, the hassle, right? So this is a good thing. It began as a good thing, and it made it possible for people to please God, right? So it was a structure that was put in place to help people. Well, then what happens as the Roman Empire grows and people get further afield, right? The Jews are more spread out. So they're coming from what really amounts to different provinces or different countries, and they have different currency, right? So the exchange rate is different. If any of you travel, you understand exactly what I'm saying, right? You know, going and buying something in Tegucigalpa is very different than buying something in Los Angeles, right? The cost of a gallon of gas, well, it's expensive everywhere, but you guys understand what I'm saying, right? So people would be bringing, let's say they're bringing in their lepta, right, or they're bringing in their rupee from India, and they're coming to the U.S. and they got 50,000 rupees. Well, they find out that that's $12,000 U.S., right? That the exchange rate is different, and so what happens is the temple tax was also paid at the time of the Passover. And so people were coming with money, but they needed to exchange that money into a drachma. They needed to exchange it into the currency of Rome. They needed to exchange it into the currency of the empire, or they didn't have enough money to pay the tax. And so what's happening is there are exchange tables. How many of you guys have ever exchanged money at an airport? You know, you come back through customs and, right? What do they always tell you? Never exchange it from the machine at the airport, right? Always go to a bank. Why do they tell you that? Why is that? Yeah, you get a better exchange rate when you're dealing with a person, you know, rather as opposed to a machine, right? You know, you get a better exchange rate. So what do you think's happening here? Well, what's happening here is the Pharisees and the Sadducees are setting different exchange rates depending on the people, right? And so they're basically making money on this, right? So they're taking something that was supposed to be good, and they've corrupted it, right? They've corrupted it. People have traveled all this distance, and they're obligated to pay the tax. And so they're between a rock and a hard place, right? They have to have this animal, and they have to use the appropriate currency. And so what you've got is I don't know what you call that in economics, a monopoly, I think, right? So, but so people are stuck. And what's happened is they've taken a good thing, and they've made it the primary thing. And so Jesus begins looking around, and he gets really upset. He says, you know what? This is supposed to be a place where people can come and worship You're making it difficult. You're making it expensive. You're making them feel bad. You're taking advantage of them, right? You're using people who don't have any other choice. You're manipulating people in my name. And Jesus looks at that and he says, this can't go on. There are rules in this house. Fathers, just like there's rules in your house. What time's dinner? What's appropriate language in your house? What's homework time, bedtime, curfew, who you can date, who you can't date, what you can do with your allowance. Every house has rules. You show me a house without rules and I'll show you anarchy. Every house has rules, and I'm not saying they're always the best rules and we always follow them. My parents had lots of rules. I followed some of them. I won't tell you which ones I broke, but you can imagine, They were the ones that it was in my interest to break, probably, right? Like things like curfew and other things like that. But houses have rules, so Jesus responds. Jesus responds, and how does he respond? It's personal. It's personal. What does the text say? The text says, how dare you turn my Father's house, I'm in verse, I don't put the verses in here, but it's in the text. How do you turn my house into a market? It's interesting. This is an affront to the Jews because this, of course, is God's house, but Jesus is saying it's his house. You see, no, this isn't just Yahweh's house. This is Jesus' house too. This is my house. It was personal. If it was a problem for God, it was a problem for Jesus. And here's a principle of spiritual fatherhood that I want to emphasize. Brothers, if something is important to God, it needs to be important to you. Amen. If something is good for God's house, you need to fight for that. As a Christian, as a member of the Temecula Valley Church, as a member of God's church, that if the church needs something or if the church is in need of something, you need to want the church to have that thing. If the church is struggling in some way, if God's house is somehow not functioning at its highest level, you need to feel some kind of way about that because God is your Father and you are his son. It's got to be personal at some point, guys. It's not doctrinal. It's not missional. It's not my idea. At some point, you as a man have to say, if this honors God, then I should feel some kind of way if it's not doing that. Is it personal? I said, well, the church is a place I go. It's your house. This is your family. God is your Father. This is your house. How do you feel about the house? Frankly, some of you struggle to get to everything and be connected. This is not the time to have a long conversation about that. Here's the question I want you to ask yourself. Is that how God expects us to treat his house? Is that an honorable way to treat God's house? Come and go as I please. If your kids did that when they were 15, you'd feel some kind of way about that. What does that show a father? Brothers, we need to do better. The church grows when the men are sold out. And I'm not talking about numeric. I'm talking about spiritual, healthy, solid. I don't care what the size is. We can be powerful if the men are committed to loving Jesus and protecting God's house. Protect God's house. Happy Father's Day. This is what we do as men. This is our house. Nobody comes into this house and pushes it around. This is our home court. Nobody comes in here and just does whatever they want to do. Lives every way, any old way they want to do. Brings in any old kind of teaching, doctrine, practice, habit, attitude. No. This is God's house. And Jesus felt some kind of way when it wasn't going right. And he took action. Amen. How does Jesus respond? I do want to back up here and say, it's not violent aggressiveness. That's not what's needed here. You're going, oh yeah, let me at that brother that missed his last Bible talk. I'm going to get... do not do that. That is not right. What I'm saying is that Jesus saw it, that it hurt him personally because he was connected to the house. Right? Jesus makes the fight personal, but it's against his Father, right? He doesn't see it as an affront to him. It's an affront to God. He separates his emotions from the reality of the situation. And you know what? As men, sometimes it's hard to do that. Sometimes I struggle to do that. It's easier to make it too personal and make it about me. And when I do that, I usually respond unkindly, too quickly, maybe harshly, maybe unsympathetically. Those things are never appropriate. But Jesus makes it personal. He removes what he sees as impurity in the temple, and he takes over the space himself. Right? It's not an attack on anyone. It is a position against that which keeps people from worshiping God. Right? It's not an attack on people. It's a stance against something that's preventing them from worshiping God. Right? It's not personal in that sense. But he deals forcefully with the issues of his Father because he's concerned with God's honor. God's honor. Psalm 69. It's interesting. It says that the disciples, after Jesus was raised from the dead, when they reminisced about this moment, Psalm 69 came to mind. And so I think that's actually very powerful because John, the gospel writer, is giving us a chance to understand how did the disciples process this after the fact? Like when time and the emotion of it had died down, what was their takeaway? And that's really powerful because it gives us a sense of what Jesus' motives were. So Psalm 69, verses 6 through 9, it's a psalm, of course, and it says, "May those who hope in you not be disgraced because of me. O Lord, the Lord Almighty, may those who seek you not be put to shame because of me, O God of Israel. For I endure scorn for your sake, and shame covers my face. I am a stranger to my brothers, an alien to my own mother's sons. For zeal for your house consumes me, and the insults of those who insult you fall on me." Talk about personalizing it. He's saying, listen, if somebody disgraces God's house, I take it as a personal affront. It falls on me. Now, why is this associated with Jesus? Because this is what Jesus went to the cross to do, to accept those insults, to embrace those insults. It was personal because he had to die because of them. But it's no different today, brothers. When something happens in our lives or in the family of God, it's still personal because Jesus still died to make those things right. It's always personal. Because every time something isn't the way God would have it be, anytime there's sin, Jesus is always paying the price for that. It's not any different today. So Psalm 69 is quoted because as the disciples reflected on it, they thought, that's who Jesus was. He was taking it on himself. He was so consumed with God's house that he was willing to take a hit if that's what it took to make it better. That's how men lead, brothers. Sacrifice. Sometimes it's harder for the guys. Sometimes it's harder, and that's okay. Finally, let's close out here in Matthew 21. My last thought is this: heal the sick. A father heals his children. Amen. A father heals his children, right? So we protect this house. A father protects. A father also heals his children. Father heals his children. So we have parallel accounts of this cleansing of the temple in all of the synoptic gospels, right? Matthew, Mark, and Luke all talk about it. But I wanted to go over here and look at Matthew chapter 12, or 21 rather, in verse 12, because again here we see sort of the great thing about the gospels is you have sort of multiple narrators, you have multiple points of view. So if you're a film person, think about it as camera angles, right? You're looking like dead on, like Tom Hanks walking across that bridge at the end of Bridge of Spies. You guys know that movie, that scene, and you can just kind of see his back, or the back of I forget the name of the guy that he pardons, right? And that guy's walking probably to his death, right, in the Soviet Union, and you see Hanks, right, kind of, and his face, knowing what's going on. He gets the painting in the car, right, and he's got the gift, but then the camera flips the angle, and you see the face of the man walking to his death, and he's smiling. Perspective, right? That the point of different camera angles is so that you understand everybody's perspective on that scene. That just one lens is not enough to sort of capture the whole emotion sometimes of a scene. And so what we have here in Matthew 21 is another lens from another point of view, giving us another angle on what Jesus was thinking. Same event, same day, same act, different lens, different camera angle. Matthew 21 and verse 12. Jesus entered the temple area and drove out all who were buying and selling. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. It is written, he said to them, my house will be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of robbers. So he quotes Jeremiah there. The blind and the lame came to him at the temple, and he healed them. But when the chief priests and the teachers of the law saw the wonderful things he did, and the children shouting out in the temple area, Hosanna to the Son of David, they were indignant. Do you hear what these children are saying? They asked him. Yes, replied Jesus. Haven't you ever heard? From the lips of children and infants you have ordained praise. And then he left and went out of the city to Bethany, where he spent the night. Early in the morning, as he was on his way back to the city, he was hungry. Same scene, but right in the middle of all this drama, what's different? What happens? Somebody. What's different? How's the account different? Who appears in this account who is nowhere mentioned in the other one? Children and sick and lame, right? The blind and the lame. All of a sudden, these marginalized communities show up in the middle of this conversation. I don't think John forgot about him. He was just looking at it from a different point of view. He was trying to focus on Jesus, the cleansing act of the temple, because that's a companion to the cleansing act at the wedding supper right before that, right? But now Matthew comes in, and what Matthew notices is that even as all this crazy stuff is going on, Jesus is committing some pretty rambunctious actions here, but the blind and the lame and the children were not afraid to approach him at all, even in a moment of action, which tells me volumes about what he was really about. To be able to do what he did and yet not put off people who were weak and maybe more easily scared, I don't know if I could do that. I don't think I have it in me to be that direct and forceful and not make people afraid of me in the process. Jeannie says, yes, that's right. Because I can get very animated at times. I was with some brothers the other night, and I was very animated. I was very animated. You know, and sometimes it can come across as a little bit much. I can definitely be a little bit much sometimes. It's just true. But the blind and the lame came for healing. That even as Jesus was in the midst of this cleansing, he didn't forget what he was all about. He was about healing the children, drawing the children close to him. That the children understood perfectly what he was about. Hosanna, Son of David. What's that big whip? I don't know. Hosanna, Son of David. You know, like it's almost like, but somehow there's this, spiritual connection that they have with him. And Jesus was still focused on healing. You know, we have in our community different individuals that are going through a lot of things. Some of them are going through very difficult times spiritually. Maybe they're not with us today. Some of them are going through very challenging life transitions. Things are going on in their careers. Things are going on with their children. You guys all know this community. You've grown up in this community. We cannot be so busy thinking about fixing the temple that we forget the people and leave them behind. Amen, right? All of you know brothers and sisters that are going through a tough time today. Maybe they're having trouble walking through the doors right now because of things maybe I don't even understand, but you understand. You've got to be a healer. If we're going to move forward as a community, we've got to heal the sick, heal the blind. I can't heal them all. Some of the folks that are struggling the most, and let me just be very honest, I'm the new minister. Some of those folks are afraid of me because they don't know me and they haven't had great experiences maybe with ministers in the past. They won't talk to me. They won't call me back. They'll talk to you. They'll call you back. Make a call. Be a healer, brothers. Be a healer. Be a bridge builder. People are hurting. We can't leave people behind. Amen. We cannot do this. We need to build. My guess, there's 30 or 40 people that could be here today if we would just stop and heal. Let's begin. Don't wait for me. Some of them won't take my call. I've tried. But they might take yours. You guys know what I'm talking about? Fathers, heal. These are your kids. These are the friends of your children. You grew up in the faith with these people. They helped you move. They may have fixed your cars. They may have loaned you money. They may have given you money. You know what I'm saying? This is a family. Families don't leave families behind. We don't leave men behind. Some of you guys appreciate that in ways that I don't even appreciate. We don't leave bodies lying on the field. We bring them home. Fathers, heal. Finally, respect this house. Very quickly, Jeremiah 7, very quick. I know it's 1:15 and we're done. Jeremiah 7, this is the other passage that is referred to in this text, right? So what you'll notice what I do, and this is sort of the first rule of reading the Gospels, right? Anytime there's a quote from the Old Testament, you always want to go look it up. Right? If there's a quote from a psalm or a quote from the Proverbs or a quote from the law, go and look it up because that's your context, right? That's that other lens, right? So you're looking at it straight on, but then you've got this other lens. And so you've got what John saw, then you have what Matthew saw, then you have Jeremiah's perspective, and then you have the psalmist's perspective. And together, all of these things help us understand what is going on here. Like what's impacting Jesus? Why is he acting this way? Why is he so uptight here? Because he's fulfilling this prophecy in Jeremiah 7. This is the word of the Lord that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Stand at the gate of the Lord's house and proclaim this message. Hear the word of the Lord, all you people of Judah who come through these gates to worship. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Reform your ways and actions, and I'll let you live in this place. Do not trust in deceptive words and say, this is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. If you really change your ways and actions and deal justly with each other and do not oppress the alien, the fatherless, or the widow, and do not shed innocent blood in this place, and if you do not follow other gods to your own harm, then I'll let you live in this place. And in the land I gave your forefathers forever and ever. But look, you're trusting in deceptive words, words that are worthless. Will you steal and murder, commit adultery and perjury, burn incense to Baal and follow other gods you have not known, and then come and stand before me in this house, which bears my name, and say, we're safe? Safe to do all these detestable things? Has the house which bears my name become a den of robbers to you? But I have been watching, declares the Lord. Now, that's a pretty spooky passage, and we're not going to spook it out here. But Jesus, in his mind, he quotes it. He says, is my house a den of robbers? And know this, when a rabbi gives you a little nugget of a passage, he means for you to remember the whole passage. And for them that were standing there, they did remember it. They got the reference. They didn't have to go look it up in their concordance or in their Bible software like I did. They didn't have to do that. They knew exactly what the whole context was. They knew who Jeremiah was, and they knew Jeremiah sat outside the gate of the temple and complained and cried and cooked his food over feces and did all kinds of crazy stuff, and nothing ever changed. Jeremiah saw Israel at its worst. And Jesus says, man, it's looking pretty rough. And he invokes the memory of that time. And this gives us the point of view. This is Jesus' heart. He is motivated by the fact that he doesn't want the temple to fall into disrepair. His heart is, I want it right. I want it good. I want everybody to be able to come here and meet their God. Celebrate the Passover. Celebrate the Exodus. Celebrate the removal of slavery. So 2 final thoughts, brothers. Protect this house. We need to learn to do what's necessary, not just what's convenient. Do what's necessary to protect the house. And as we're protecting the weak and healing the sick, don't forget to respect this house. You know, God is our Father. And God is amazingly loving, enormously forgiving, deeply compassionate, but deeply cares about his house. Wants it to be a house of prayer for all nations. Wants it to be a place where people can come and be healed, not feel excluded, not feel strange. I don't want anybody in the Temecula Valley community, member or non-member, to ever feel weird coming through that door. I want everybody to feel like this place will accept them and love them and heal them and not judge them and inspire them and help them to see the God who is the God of all nations. Happy Father's Day.